Ron Klemencic is a former chairman of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. The council has been around for 40 years, and you've been there for 25 years of it. And we're going to talk some about the history of the council, where it's been and where it's going. Where is the council now at this point in history where we're really starting to see some futuristic designs in cities of tomorrow?
Well, right now it's very exciting. I have been around for 25 years, and right now the council is probably the most active that it's ever been. And there's the most amount of enthusiasm and interest from not just kind of Western countries, but the entire world. We see participation in our council events from across the globe. In fact, for the symposium that's here today at IIT, I don't know exactly how many countries are represented, but if I guess it's at least 30 or 40. And this has really come to pass only in the last few years. And so the interest is there, but I think as a vehicle to share information and to learn from one another, that's the kind of right now the power of the council. Those tall buildings are being built everywhere in the world at this point, from the Middle East to India to Southeast Asia, everywhere in fact. And to have the dissemination of the information and the lessons that are learned and different technical stories that can be told is really powerful, and I think a lot of people are gaining value from that. That's where we are now. If we look back historically at where the council came from, just briefly, and how we got to this point, the council was founded back in the late 60s, and in fact, initially it was a subcommittee of another organization called the IABSE, International Association of Bridge and Structural Engineers. And it was only a committee in that group, but there was interest growing. And at that time, with the Hancock Tower and Sears Tower really kind of on the front page of the newspaper, there was a lot of enthusiasm and growth in the industry then. And so that committee essentially got so active that it broke away from IABSE and formed the CTBUH back in the late 60s, led by Dr. Beadle and then Fazler Khan and a number of other notable structural engineers and architects from that time. And through the 70s, the council was very involved in the industry, writing lots of monographs, disseminating lots of information that was being discovered, and served a really critical role. And at that time, the monographs that were published, that are on many people's library shelves, are these thick tomes of information. And we went through a long period of that. And then maybe it was in the late 80s. There was the Asian building boom in the 80s where things were still going along very energetically. In the late 80s and early 90s, there was a drift away from that energy and enthusiasm. And there was probably a 10-year period from, say, the late 80s till almost 2000 when things were really difficult for the council. There was a lot of interest that had been lost by the industry. Participation was waning. We were struggling to figure out who we were and why we were. And one of the catalyzing events that occurred for better or worse, for worse, I guess, but was 9/11. And at 9/11, when the attacks occurred, the council was still struggling with this identity crisis of who we are and what's our purpose in the industry. And that was this galvanizing event that required the council to do something. You know, we're supposedly a leader in the industry, a voice for the industry of tall buildings. Here's 9/11. The press was touting the doom of all tall buildings, that we'll never build another tall building. And the council really stepped forward at that point and assumed a leadership position in the industry, addressing the issues related to 9/11, addressing safety in high-rise buildings, publishing many documents to inform the public, inform the industry as to kind of what the informed view of these topics were. And then as that moved forward, the kind of globalization of high-rise really started to catch fire, in particular in the Middle East and in China. And so the council's place in the world started to gain some momentum. And there were a number of international conferences held in places like Kuala Lumpur and Shanghai and India and the Middle East that really catalyzed that council into this international organization where we sit today. So the council staff, led by Anthony Wood, our executive director, have done an absolutely fantastic job in the last few years to really leverage that enthusiasm and produce a lot of valuable material for council members and for the public in general. So,
I was going to ask you, at what point did the council truly become an international organization? Because I could see where some of the loss of interest in the 80s would have been simply because all of the action was going on somewhere else. There wasn't much going on here. What was it now that really got the council on an international footing?
I think the fact that the people around the world started building tall buildings, and the council was an outlet for them to reach out to other professionals, to other experienced people who had been there and done that, and draw from that body of experience. And so the fact that there's so many tall buildings being built in the Middle East and in China and in India, it was really that external force of construction happening elsewhere, and those clients, those cultures needing and wanting, starving for the information to do it well. And that's really propelled the council now into a very active time and a very exciting time. And I think going forward, we're going to continue to see this because the tall buildings are spreading everywhere, throughout South America, across the globe. So the council will continue to serve this important role of bringing everyone together.
As I've been reminded on a number of occasions, the council is not only the council on tall buildings, but of urban habitat. And the urban habitat portion of that obviously is getting more and more important today. How can the council, or what is the council doing to help move all of this forward? What critical role is there that needs to be filled moving forward, and how do we lead it?
Well, the council has a number of active, what we call working groups. Some people might call them subcommittees. We call them working groups. The point being that we want them to work as a group and to try and develop guidelines, develop recommendations that can be shared with communities around the world, to the various municipalities, the various building officials, to help guide their city planning efforts, to help guide master planning efforts for large developments. And the council has a working group in this area and wants to continue to kind of inform the various municipalities and governments around the world as to kind of best practices, what's worked in the past, what hasn't worked in the past. And this is a place for the council to help advance the betterment of the cities in the world. This is another theme, I think, going forward. I mentioned earlier the notion of so many buildings are built as one-off islands in this kind of sea of the city. And going forward, in particular from a resource management point of view, water resources, energy resources, looking at things much more broadly from a resource management point of view is going to become more and more critical. And so the council playing a role in guiding and helping steer that conversation is going to be really important.
What resources does the council have to assist in this? And I know that there's also a great deal of importance placed on your international representatives, because every country has a council representative, I guess, whose job it is to go in those countries and to spread the word and to try and make people aware and get them organized. Is that right? Tell me about their role.
Well, you summarized it fairly clearly there, that their role is to get the word out in their country, organize the local parties of interest into having perhaps local conversations, whether they have conferences or meetings or just have some internet dialogue. The point is to have some dialogue in whatever setting, and to organize and focus that energy and kind of summarize the topics of concern there, and then bring those topics to the larger, broader international body. And so each of the country representatives and city representatives meet at least once a year, if not more often via internet, to talk about not only the issues, but how the council can address them. In fact, tomorrow, there's an all-day leadership meeting here at IIT with all of those country leaders and various council leadership from around the world to talk about those very things, about how the council can produce guidelines, can provide recommendations to assist these various kind of local needs.
When we were discussing before the interview of the things that we wanted to talk about, you brought up a couple of very interesting points here. Number one is the increasing role that technology has in the development of tall buildings and urban habitat, and specifically, one of the points you brought up was building information modeling, which I'm going to let you explain, but the thing that caught my attention is that it is an advancement from CAD. It's more of modeling as a design tool, which I've seen, seeing bridge engineers model bridges and actually do 3D models of the individual pieces and how they fit together, right. Which when that started, I wasn't aware that that was actually being used as a design tool. Explain building information modeling and what it is and the value it brings.
All right. So building information modeling in its simplest form is building a three-dimensional computer model representation of the building you plan to build, and then kind of behind the graphics, if you will, is technical information, data, whether it's the size and shape and weight of the steel or the reinforcing or the concrete or the doorknobs or the hinges on the doors. However detailed you want to get, you can essentially build the entire building virtually in the computer and not just have a picture of it, but have all the underlying data behind it. That's the promise of BIM. The reality of BIM today is that the industry continues to struggle with truly implementing that and how to best implement that. So as a specific example, to model every screw, every nut, every bolt of a building can be done, but it's incredibly labor intensive, incredibly tedious, and the question is, well, what value do you gain from that? And the industry is still struggling with that question. Well, where is the value? And there isn't really a clear answer to that yet. I'd say everyone's talking about BIM and promoting BIM because it's the latest marketing spin. And to be hired for the next job, if you don't do BIM, wink, wink, whatever that means, then you won't get hired. So everyone has to say they do BIM. But honestly, I only am aware of, in my own career, one building where we've actually realized the true value or the true output of BIM, in that the entire building, from cradle to grave, was done electronically. There was not a sheet of paper. And I don't know of any other building that's been done on. There's been parts of buildings that have been completed this way, but not an entire building with structure, mechanical, electrical, architectural, et cetera. The best example outside of the building industry where this has been done is with Boeing, and the 787 was all done, designed, tested virtually. And the reason they were able to do that as quickly as they did was that Boeing is a sole source and controls everything. And our industry is so fragmented with all the contractors, subcontractors, consultants, subconsultants, to get everyone to speak the common language and interchange data is a huge, huge challenge. And the software's not even there yet to allow us to do that.
Well, the thing that caught my attention about this is that it is a truly object-oriented environment, which all of you computer programmers out there will appreciate, because every component has a property and they interact on each other. Could something like this, and it sounded like the answer was yes, you could do some analysis in BIM that might cut corners or be able to be more efficient in other design areas, right. Save some steps perhaps?
Yeah, and I think the simple view of it is using it to do that, to look at maybe more efficient use of materials. Some more advanced views of how to use BIM more effectively. One of them that's already being done is in building management. So not so much the design and construction process, but after the building's completed, while you're managing the building, while you're operating the systems, the mechanical and electrical systems, to have a three-dimensional computer model of not just the physical structure, but all the components and parts and pieces of the building, and be able to monitor the life of the building and then better manage the life of the building. This is a real powerful piece of BIM now, and it's just starting to be used with some regularity. The other part of BIM that I see in the future is our focus, I think, will start to turn not away from efficient design, but efficient design with a different target. And the target is going to be, I think, more the amount of energy embodied or embedded in the building that we build. So for instance, if you were to build a concrete building, and you could buy the cement from China for a very low price, but that cement was manufactured in a plant that was coal-fired, and then all the cement had to be shipped on a boat from China to the United States, versus, I live in Seattle, a cement plant that's powered by hydroelectric power, and that the shipping costs are nil because the project's in Seattle. Even though the cost per cubic yard of the concrete might be slightly more for the locally made material, the energy embedded in actually making that material is dramatically different. And I think the focus as the energy crisis continues and we get more and more sensitive to how much are we really putting into these buildings and embedding in them, that BIM will be a tool there to help us evaluate those types of decisions as we design our buildings.
And the other one that you mentioned here, which we really don't know what it is, and that's good because I won't have to worry about asking you the wrong questions, is integrated project delivery. Right. That, there has been technology out there for collaboration for some time now, but what is IPD today as it stands?
Today as it stands, I'd say, depending on who you ask, you'll get a different answer. There's 100 different interpretations of IPD. I think the kind of sympathetic and comfortable answer to that question is increased collaboration between the owner, the contractor, and the design team, the architects and engineers. What IPD was originally viewed to be is not just simply collaboration in the sense of kind of for the good of the brotherhood, let's make a better building. It was viewed as a new risk allocation model. And this is where it starts to break down in the industry, because truly reallocating the risk of building a building from the owner to the contractor to the design team is a very, very tenuous subject, meaning that the design teams, architects and engineers, the business model for an architectural practice or an engineering practice is so different as a business model from the business model of a contractor, that in order then to get in bed together as business partners and deliver a building and allocate the risk in a commensurate way is very, very challenging question because the underlying finances and economics don't support that collaboration. And so to truly go down the IPD route as it was envisioned is going to require a rethinking of the fundamental business models of these various players. On the surface, it can be just a kumbaya. We all get together and love each other and design a nice building. But that's not what it was intended to be. And so, once again, today, I think it's more marketing spin than reality. Yeah, we say we do IPD, but do you really?
Well, but when I looked at that and I thought about it, one of the first things I thought of was design build.
Right. And design build is the closest thing perhaps to IPD, but even within design build, the notion is, let's say the design team, the architects and engineers work for the contractor in that setting. If there's a problem with the building, let's say that the structural engineer said there's going to be 2,000 tons of steel in this building. And at the end of the day, there's 2,200 tons of steel in the building. Who bears that cost? And in a traditional design build setting, the cost is borne generally by the contractor. He's the big risk taker. And the engineer maybe gets spanked and feels bad, but doesn't physically pay for it. In the IPD, in the theoretical IPD model, the engineer pays for it. The engineer at the beginning of the job says 2,000 tons and needs to move heaven and earth so that at the end it's 2,000 tons. And if it's not going to be 2,000 tons, it's the engineer's obligation to inform his or her teammates that other design decisions have to be made because we're not going to meet this goal. And that's where it gets really sticky, because the engineering firms, as my own firm, is not in a position to pay for that 200 tons of steel. We don't have the financial resources to do that. And our fees aren't commensurate with that level of risk.
It just seems that building a tall building anymore, it's not the traditional thing where somebody comes up with building plans and then you get a final set of plans and you go out and build them, because at least two buildings I can think of, the Shanghai World Financial Center and Burj Khalifa, all changed heights between the time they were initially designed, so it's really hitting a moving target now, and hopefully this helps us to manage that better, in theory anyway.
In theory.
So how does the council lead going forward? These are the two things we're looking at now. How do we start to lead in some of those areas?
Well, again, through our working groups, have working groups specifically targeted at those topics. And as opposed to the years of past when we produced these 1,000-page long tomes that lined the shelves of libraries, what's been more effective and more useful for the industry as a whole is to publish fairly quickly, say in 6 months or 12 months' time, 40, 50, 60-page long guideline, best practices, even just questions to be asked. As a good example of that, in the aftermath of 9/11, immediately after 9/11, we got together as a council and published guidelines for the enhancement of tall building safety. But they weren't specific recommendations per se, because it was still an open dialogue. What it was a guideline that outlined all of the questions that should be asked. And then perhaps for each of those questions, there was a palette or a suite of answers presented. Everything from do nothing to do 10 times X. And on a lot of these kind of changing, evolving topics, this is a real value the council can provide as quick information to the industry to help guide it and shape it, as opposed to kind of reporting from an encyclopedia kind of point of view.
So there is a lot of work to be done. The issues are getting more and more complex, and the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat is the brain trust of the tall building industry. This is where all of the issues come together. Thank you, Ron Klemencic, former chairman of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat.